Coming up, the New York Football Giants look to climb out of the winless cellar, taking on the Cleveland Browns on the road. We break down the key matchups, the betting lines, and all the fantasy plays coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Mackwitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, and we're debating whether or not the New York Football Giants can be a team capable of beating a Cleveland Browns roster, which has questions, which has concerns at quarterback, but also has one of the better defenses in the league as well. Andy, how are we, sir, on a Friday morning?
I am doing all right, Adam. As you
Which
talk about
dungeon are you in tonight?
Yes. As we talked about pre-show, I'm in the process of moving, and if anyone knows, moving is like one of the worst things you can ever do. Like, but not, the packing is ridiculous, but also like, when can you move in? How do you do it? All this stuff, and it just gets even easier when you have a small child. So, Adam, I am stressed, but I'm excited to talk a little bit of New York Giants. I'm also a little stressed about Myles Garrett and the Cleveland Browns defense, if I'm going to be completely honest with you.
You better believe it, man. Giants right now are plus 6.5 on the road. Over under is set at 39 right now. We'll get into our official picks and some more betting plays later on in the episode. When we talk about key predictions, talk about key players inside of these matchups, you mentioned it. Go inside the trenches. Let's start on the other side of it and the matchup when we talk about Myles Garrett and trying to manage against it. Listen, the New York Football Giants have a stud left tackle in Andrew Thomas. You want to be able to set him out there and say, take on that assignment and hopefully play him to a neutral. Like, I think, there's a lot of matchups around the NFL when playing to a standoff is okay. Like, that can be considered a win on the New York Giants side of it. The problem may be how the Cleveland Browns are going to be willing to approach that front and making sure that Myles Garrett maximizes his opportunities to get after Daniel Jones.
Yeah, we know, look no further than defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz and how he prepares his teams. We know the type of defensive coordinator he is. If you're not familiar with Jim Schwartz, obviously he was the defensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans for a long time when their defense was very, very stout. Obviously was the head coach of the Detroit Lions for a little bit. Then ended up going over to Philadelphia and was one of the big catalysts for their team on the defensive side of the ball, really looking great. They clearly are missing Jim Schwartz in Philadelphia since his departure. The defense has not looked great. But Adam, it's very interesting because he's all about aggression and pressure. And he tries to do all of that by not necessarily blitzing a whole bunch of the time, but using exotic stunts and different looks from the four-man defensive front that he puts out there. And man, oh man, having a guy like Myles Garrett for him allows him to do so many other things on the defensive side of the ball. It's why Cleveland is so successful. When you have a guy like Myles Garrett that they feel confident that he could beat anyone one-on-one, it means that you basically look at the Giants and say, you got to chip him. You got to do something in order to stop this guy. And you basically have to dictate your offense around what we're doing on defense and not the other way around.
Yeah, it'll make me really curious because you can use Chris Manhertz if you want and run 12 personnel. And we'll talk a little bit about how I think the Giants can be successful on offense potentially. You can chip against him. But I wonder about the pre-snap and how they move him around. I wonder if they're so bullish on Myles Garrett, as they should be, that they just say, yeah, go beat the best left tackle. And then we'll go ahead and get some other pressure coming off the other side in Illuminor. Or do they flip him over there and you just start to play that chess game that I think is going to be hard pre-snap maybe for the Giants and Daniel Jones to adjust to? What are going to be the hot reads? How are you going to identify where's Myles Garrett coming from? How are we going to pick him up? And then also, how are we going to most likely, even when we're picking him up, play away from him, right? Even if you're setting yourself up to have Chris Manhertz in chipping on him or letting Andrew Thomas take him one-on-one, you're still going to want to run the ball to the other side. You're still going to want to stay away from the impact that he can have on the game. And interestingly enough, I think what is concerning for the Giants early on this season is the flip side of it, what's supposed to be a very dynamic tandem in Keyvon Thibodeaux and Brian Burns. Because when you look at this matchup, you say, hey, Myles Garrett, established track record, but he's the all-around. We talk about, being speed versus power versus being both. Right now, you're talking about two players in Keyvon Thibodeaux and Brian Burns that have not gotten a ton of pressure. Burns has 7 tackles, not a single quarterback hit over the first 2 games this season. Thibodeaux, 4 tackles, 3 quarterback hits, but neither of them has put a sack there per Pro Football Focus. And on top of that, right now, Thibodeaux is 80th among edge defenders in pass rush pressure at 4.1%. Burns is 86 at just 2.9. So, we're talking about 2 players that need to be the point of attack for this Giants defense to have success. And so far, in over 2 games, we've just seen opposing offensive line be able to mitigate them. And so it's this flipped script. If you, right now, on paper, if you said Cleveland Browns' ability to get after Daniel Jones and disrupt this offense versus Brian Burns and Keyvon Thibodeaux's ability, I'm going to look at Cleveland and say, yeah, the edge obviously has to go to them. The Giants have to prove that they can find a way not to give up a 10-minute opening drive like they did against the Washington Commanders last week.
Yeah, and keep in mind, the Cleveland Browns defense is awesome. We mentioned Myles
Yes.
Garrett, but they are just
that's tip of the spear. There's a dozen other names to throw out here. Yeah.
Right. It's not just Myles Garrett that made the Cleveland Browns have the least points scored against them in last season in 2023. They are a stout defensive team across the board. Their secondary is clearly better than the Giants secondary. We've seen Myles Garrett. He's the reigning defensive player of the year. He has 2 forced fumbles, 2 sacks already in 2 games, and he's been hurt. Like, think about that, Adam. Like, he's been a little bit dinged up, dealing with some foot issues, I believe. But man, it is a very, very difficult thing when you think about who's got the upper hand. I thought Keyvon Thibodeaux actually played decently against the Washington Commanders. Watching back some of the game, he was in the backfield. He had a few QB hits. He had a sack taken away on a phantom penalty for the Giants. Like, it felt like he was making an impact on the game. Unfortunately, the Giants couldn't stop a nosebleed when it came to the rush defense, and the Washington Commanders ran all over the Giants, which is my big concern in this game too. When you talk about what the Giants defense is going to be facing, but yeah, it feels like the Cleveland defense obviously has the advantage. This is the toughest opponent defensively that I think the Giants are going to face. So what kind of offense are we going to see from the Giants? I turn it over to you, Adam. Are we going to see more of what happened week 1 where the Minnesota Vikings looked to confuse Daniel Jones and the offense? Or are we going to see a more ultra aggressive Daniel Jones and Brian Daboll calling the plays like we saw against the Commanders?
Yeah, it's weird too because we know last week the Giants, didn't have no kicker. We've gone chapter and verse on how disappointing that decision or lack thereof was for the Giants because it could have been putting more points on the board, certainly. So on the one hand, you go back and you think about how we've seen, we'll talk about here in a second, Devin Singletary, but the ability to have a balanced offensive attack, to not have to play from behind like they did in the first week. Second week was much more back and forth. But how do you make sure to occupy the time of possession to win that battle? They got absolutely destroyed in week 2 about that. So unlike Washington, by the way, as well, it's not just that you go and have success. I don't think you just go out and throw 18 targets to Malik Neighbors. You may want to, but I think that Cleveland's going to be very capable of making that a more difficult task or baiting Daniel Jones maybe into taking some of those chances and having the personnel to punish you if you go that extra step. So how do you find a way to be balanced with Devin Singletary? How do you get other players involved on the offensive side of the ball is going to be absolutely critical to me. Coming back here in a second, let's pull it back and talk about both these teams from a high level over the first 2 weeks of the season, and then look at our critical players elsewhere in terms of matchups in the secondary, our wide receiver room, their wide receiver room. I have a concern that the New York Football Giants fans that are optimistic about this game are maybe mislabeling some players on Cleveland as already duds when they actually, in fact, still have a lot left in the tank. Let's get into that here in just one moment. Okay, Andy. So quickly here at the top, when you go back over and look at Cleveland, because I think there's a DeShaun Watson conversation that needs to be had here. The league average for passing yards over the first 2 weeks of the season was 193. Daniel Jones right there at $186. Defenses are clearly making some adjustments schematically, going to more, coverage looks that are making it harder to move the ball through the air. Running games are coming back in a big way. I know that when you go and look and say, well, in week 1, DeShaun Watson only completed 53% of his passes. He threw 2 interceptions. Like, it was not pretty. That's fine. He turned around against the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that does not look good right now. But he also completed almost 65% of his passes, 186 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, only took 2 sacks. The QBR rating, seismic from week 1, where it was an 11 to a 42.8. I just think that there's a concern here for me that when you look at these first two games and you look at DeShaun Watson, and we'll talk about Jerry Jeudy here in a second, it's like, DeShaun Watson, he's cooked. He's not the player he once was. Oh, Jerry Jeudy, a castaway from the Denver Broncos, Amari Cooper, Dallas didn't want to pay him. It's like, yeah, okay. But then Jerry Jeudy turns around and has a really good second week. And DeShaun Watson at least looks competent. I think, or do you agree that it's very easy to say nothing to worry about here when in fact I have a real concern that DeShaun Watson maybe shows a little bit of that old DeShaun Watson in a game against a defense that's going to ask Deonte Banks to match up against Jerry Jeudy and try to shut him down himself to make that secondary task easier for the Giants.
Well, this is a tough one, Adam, because it depends on what your outlook is for the Giants defense, right? Like I don't think DeShaun Watson, Amari Cooper, and Jerry Jeudy is a bottom
Gauntlet.
5 offense in the
Okay.
league, right? Even
Right.
if you said they were
Right.
league average, right? Like if you said they were middle of the road in terms of their explosiveness with DeShaun Watson, that still is a huge problem considering what just happened to the Giants against
Yeah.
the Commanders. I don't think Jaden Daniels and Brian Robinson and Terry McLaurin is necessarily a more potent offense than what Cleveland has. And look at what happened to the Giants last week, where it was the bend don't break. They basically scored on every single possession. That's what the Giants face now. To me, it's more like, regardless of how good you think Deshaun Watson is, and I think you're right, he is slightly better than I think people are piling on him for all the off-field stuff that he's had happen.
Right.
They still have the ability to move the ball against this Giants defense until I'm proven otherwise. Like right now, Adam, I think my bigger concern is how bad is this Giants defense as opposed to how good is this Cleveland offense?
Yeah, and it's certainly something to consider too. And by the way, so there's a couple of things here that I wanted to get into. First, when we talk about what the Giants are bringing to the table in terms of how we saw some improvement, like PFF grades. We talked the other day about reps and snap counts and how we saw Drew Phillips get on the field more. So that was promising. It made it feel like, okay, maybe we're going to get some of what we've been waiting for on the defensive side of the football. And that feels like a bit of an overreaction given that it was 2 weeks in, but we were just sold something in the preseason and then didn't see it come to fruition necessarily over the first couple of games. Getting Micah McFadden back really mattered. He played well overall with an 87.8 PFF grade. When you got into this secondary, the concern right now is not about if Deonte Banks, listen, I'll put the run grade to the side here. Can he cover? Yes, of course. 78.1 tackle grade, 64.7 overall, a 72.4 in coverage. That worked for him, right? The secondary piece against Cooper, that's going to be a concern here. The other thing notable is like, how do you defend? You mentioned the bend but don't break. How do you defend these key moments? Cleveland through 2 weeks, they're 4 for 29 on third downs. They're a mess. Wow. Under 14% conversion. Their opponents are converting. Yeah.
What a stat.
Adam,
kudos to you, my friend. Kudos to you for that one. That is alarming.
And that would be, this would be where it's like, okay, do I think that they're more talented on the offensive side than we've seen the first 2 weeks potentially? Yes, you have to acknowledge that. Do I think the Giants have concerns? Of course they do. But if you are the Giants and you're Shane Bowen, you're looking at that third down and saying, listen, this is it. If on third downs, Keyvon Thibodeaux, Brian Burns, and our coverage can be strong enough when Cleveland is on their own 45 to say 4th and 6 now, punt that ball away, versus a week ago when it was, again, matriculate down the field, 10+ minute drives, losing the possession battle by such a significant margin that you understood why you weren't able to find your way to put more points on the board, even without having your kicker on the field. So I look at that and I circle it, double stamp it, no erases, and say, the Giants need to find a way defensively to get off the field when those opportunities present themselves, because this is universally true about the NFL. When you get those opportunities and you don't take advantage of them, 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s, to get off the field, it might not be on that possession, but you see it come back around to haunt you if it keeps coming over and over again over the course of the game. Cleveland's bad converting. The Giants need to find a way to get themselves off the field.
Well, the difficulty in getting off the field, as you saw from the Washington Commanders game, is that the Giants can't stop the run. So that's the other thing that concerns me quite a bit, Adam, is we talk about DeShaun Watson, we talk about their weapons. It doesn't seem like David Njoku is going to be there for them. They can run the football, and the Giants struggle, obviously, in the run game. Right now, Adam, the Giants are 26th in the league in yards allowed per game. They're 32nd in a bunch of different categories, but just to illustrate on the rushing yards, they're 28th in the league in rushing yards allowed per game. So they are bottom 5. with 165 yards per game on the ground. Jerome Ford, well, while there is no Nick Chubb, Jerome Ford is averaging over 5 yards a carry right now. My biggest concern is how can the Giants get off the field if they cannot stop the run? To
Yeah.
me, if you're Cleveland, and there's a couple other reasons why I think this is going to be the game plan is we're going to use DeShaun Watson and those weapons on the outside sparingly until the Giants can prove that they can actually bring somebody in the box and stop our rushing attack. To me, that's going to be the key to the game is how do the Giants turn around from the Commanders running all over them for over 200 yards last game and say, we have a commitment this game to stopping the run and making DeShaun Watson beat us through the air.
And you talk about it too, man. I mentioned that third down conversion stat for the Cleveland Browns coming into this game. That's awesome. Guess what? Giants opponents, they're 10 of 24 for almost 42% on third downs. And you mentioned that rushing attack, 5 yards for Ford per carry. Guess what? The Giants are surrendering 5.3 yards per carry. So usually, like, these are the kind of stats that when you see a player that does something well and a team that doesn't do something well, you start to get concerned about exacerbating that, right? And getting exposed at these points of weakness. And again, we talk about time of possession and being able to dictate scripts. Guess what? When you look at a player like DeShaun Watson, to reiterate, he only, he threw I shouldn't say only. In week 1, he threw it 45 times, an insane amount. They lose 33-17 to, listen, we think a good Dallas team. They get absolutely destroyed in week 2. But in week 2 for the Cleveland Browns, 34 attempts, right? Trying to get back to a sense of balance, trying to be able to play from ahead, trying to be competitive in a game early so you don't get forced into those situations. We saw this, by the way, with the Giants, forced into passing it way more than they probably wanted to in week 1. We don't want Daniel Jones throwing it 40 times plus times a game. We want there to be this balance because on our side, we have Devin Singletary, who you had the stat, has had forced the most missed tackles so far through 2 weeks of the NFL season. Yes, he had the fumble, but he's doing the things that you wanted him to do when you signed him and thought the stability he would bring to it. The problem is, if you're not in games, if you're not competitive, you're going to automatically mitigate your ability to use that side of your attack and maybe offset a little bit of Myles Garrett and the pressure he can bring and give your opportunities. We'll continue to talk about some of these other weapons that you want to get the ball to.
Yeah, I think Devin Singletary is obviously going to be the key. I mean, listen, we're not reinventing the wheel here, telling anyone that the team that's more dominant in the run game is more than likely going to win.
Especially this year, especially this season so far, that's been very big across the league right now.
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's a good highlight. You talked about kind of scoring down, and people have more of an emphasis on time of possession, and obviously, everyone's talking about cover 2 and how they're not letting the explosive plays happen over the top. They're making teams earn it down the field, and so how do you do that? You impose your will on the offensive line, and so this is a real test for this New York Giants offensive line. Not only trying to stop Myles Garrett, but can they create the same holes for Devin Singletary in the run game that they were able to against the Commanders? Because he looked fantastic. And the Giants cannot have the Cleveland Browns get 15 more minutes of time of possession. The Giants need to flip the script and be able to hold on to the ball for more possessions, or else they're going to be in for a very, very long day.
Let's come back here and talk about the time of possession battle that could be critical, whether or not we think the Giants can get something going in the running game. And then looking at the wide receiver matchup, specifically for Malik Nabers, 18 targets, big breakout performance. Are we now believing that he is kind of that matchup proof player, or can Cleveland take that away and start to force Daniel Jones and the Giants to find other ways to be successful? We'll get into that here in just one moment. All right, Andy. So we're talking about a few different angles here. I don't think anyone is underestimating the Cleveland Browns defense. I think it's the offensive side that we worry about a little bit here. I think it's hard to know 100% what to take away from Washington and what the Giants defense did, right? It's a last second field goal. You barely gave up 20 plus points against them, but it's a rookie quarterback. It's a new coach. There's a lot of moving parts there that you're trying to navigate through. If we think about the Giants' ability to rely on that run game, let's just ask that question first and foremost. Do you think the Giants will be successful running the ball against the Cleveland Browns?
Yes, I do. I do. And
then you have to believe they have a chance in this game, because I think you can't have one without the other. This is not going to be a pass heavy, path to victory for the Giants, I don't believe.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think the more times Daniel Jones drops back, the more chances there could be of chaos happening, especially with the Cleveland defense. But for me, You mentioned Devin Singletary. I think this is going to be a huge Daniel Jones using his legs kind of game, because
Okay.
you can't let Myles Garrett just pin his ears back and go take on Illuminor one-on-one, or even Andrew Thomas one-on-one. You're talking about the reigning defensive player of the year. I feel like there are going to be designed runs for Daniel Jones in this game to be able to get the Giants that time of possession we talked about before. You can't just rely on Devin Singletary. You clearly cannot rely on getting Malik Neighbors 18 targets. Like, that is just not sustainable. And to
Yeah.
me, the way that we continue to have these drives, the offensive line looks good. I could see at least 3 or 4 different designed runs for Daniel Jones. I know it brings on injury issues, but hey, listen, the Giants need to win football games, and Daniel Jones, one of his weapons is his athletic ability and his ability to make people miss when he rushes the ball out in space. So, Adam, that's one of my favorite wagers of the week is Daniel Jones
Hello.
over rushing yards. I just think the Giants are going to try to get him out into space and try to create some different holes and make it so that Cleveland can't just do and dictate everything from their defensive line.
No, and I think it's an interesting way to look at it too here, and it does lead us into talking about some of our Andy's Bet Corner, Andy's Bet of the Week, and of course, yours truly, and that sexy deep dive parlay that you know you're going to want to get into. You mentioned it there. That is one of your first ones when we talk about looking at this game for some of the bets that you like. Daniel Jones over under on rushing yards is 27.5. No more need be said. You've described how you're going to be able to utilize your legs here. You know, one of the things I even thought about watching the Thursday night game with the Jets was the ability for, and listen, Patriots, we don't think they're a particularly good team, but there was something from the offensive line that was very matter of fact. You almost gave some of the inside pressure up, knowing that you wanted to just let Aaron Rodgers roll out. And that's just to give him time to assess the field and put the ball where he wants it. I like the idea of utilizing that. I don't think we've seen a lot of that in these first 2 weeks. We've seen running from Daniel Jones, and we've seen some nice play action and some option read plays for Daniel Jones that he's worked well, specifically against the Commanders. I thought he did a good job into the belly of Devin Singletary, pulling it back and then finding his own little path right up the gut of the defense. But if you believe that you can have that little quick mobility to the outside, I think there's some like sell the middle and then buy the edge for Daniel Jones. And I think a couple of those kind of chunk plays could be the difference between punting away from your own 45. And I'm not even talking about, getting touchdowns on that drive, but getting across midfield, keeping kind of the field battle and also time of possession relatively equal here. It leaves Daniel Jones exposed to big hits. The other big takeaway real quick was that I noticed that Aaron Rodgers knows that I slide 7 seconds before anyone is getting close enough to hit me. Like, that's veteran QB, knows exactly what he needs to be doing. Whereas other quarterbacks, Daniel Jones specifically, sometimes doesn't know that he should be sliding until there's someone almost on top of him. So, but I like that element of it and figuring out a way to get Daniel Jones some easy rushing yards.
Yeah, looking at Aaron Rodgers, yeah, he looked around. He's like, I don't need the extra 3 yards. I don't want any contact. Like, I got the first down. I'm doing what I need to
By
do.
the way, sorry, quick side note. Did you see the play when he was going out of bounds? But it was also like, oh, that's also a 40-year-old quarterback he was trying to go. But the defender was like, yeah, I'm faster than you. He's like, oh my God, like I got rolled up on here. I was done. I was all good. I just couldn't quite get across the road before the light turned green.
Yeah, you can tell that his hitch is not what it used to be
And the old giddy up.
from a few years ago. But his mobility was one of the reasons why the Jets looked so good yesterday. Him rolling out,
Yes.
him off platform throwing the ball. I know that,
Yeah.
we're a Giants podcast, but watching Aaron Rodgers roll out and be able to throw darts all over the field
Of
is
course.
one of those things where you're like, I really hope that Daniel Jones has the ability to get out in space and try to emulate some of that, because that's what the Giants are going to need, knowing that Myles Garrett's going to give the pressure. Adam, talk to me about how you think the game script's going to go. What are you thinking about in this game? What are you liking? Where's your head at right now?
So I'm optimistic that the Giants can hopefully have a consistency in terms of the play style and game script of this game. Now, there's a little bit of a risk here that if I think things don't go the right way and it's the second half and you're talking about the Giants need to come from behind, then maybe you end up getting some passing yards. So, but extra kind of garbage time passing yards for Daniel Jones, potentially. But I'll go ahead and give you my parlay play this week. Now, Daniel Jones over under passing yards is 81.5. I just told you the league average is 193. So this number seems low, like just on a high level, but I'm going to take the under because it is a good defense. It is a good secondary. And I think the Giants are going to need to be somewhat systematic. Couple of big shots, which I'm more than willing to be wrong on. And all of a sudden it changes it. but this just feels like the kind of game that if the Giants are going to have a chance to win it, it's going to require it to be a back and forth battle. So I'll take the under on 181 yards for Daniel Jones. I'll take the over on 7.5 second half points for the Giants. This feels kind of easy to me. Can they score a touchdown in 10 points? 10 points, maybe a garbage time touchdown gets you there. Put that in the bucket as well. And then the other one, which I mentioned the other day when we talked about the rep count for the New York Football Giants, it was very easy to look and forget that Theo Johnson was on the field, but he was. He still had a large share of it. And if you go look at the PFF grade, he also was successful in terms of being able to be on the field and also hold up in pass blocking. So my sneaky play that gets our parlay all the way there. He's plus 800 by himself for an anytime touchdown. I'm going to probably die on this hill this year, but I cannot get away from the fact that Theo Johnson, when he was on the field last week, graded out strong enough. Chris Manhertz, you're talking about a guy that gave you a pass blocking grade of 69.3. Theo Johnson was a 78.2, and that came in 12 pass blocking reps. If he can be serviceable there, that means he can be on the field in 12 personnel, and maybe Daniel Bellinger is not. And that means I can get his first touchdown of his rookie season. You put those babies all together in a nice little basket, Andrew. You're talking plus 3,600. I mean, stop it. Stop it, guys. It's free money. I'm giving you free money right now on a Friday.
Please bet responsibly. Anytime Adam goes with one of his crazy parlays, just make sure to bet responsibly. Adam, I'm surprised because you are talking about the Giants scoring multiple times in the second half. You're talking about Theo Johnson scoring. You got the Giants putting up 30 against the number one defense in the league. I'm excited to hear your prediction on the game because, I mean, it's all trending towards you saying the Giants by two scores, 3 scores. Where are you at on prediction time for this game?
We got 2 other games, our favorite and our underdog of the weekend that we'll get to. When it comes to the New York Football Giants, as we said at the top, they are, of course, a plus 6.5 on the road here in Cleveland. I didn't say that they're going to score 30 points. If you want to get the over in the second half, they only need to score 10 there. I think it'll be back and forth. I went back and forth on this because there's no objective reason to pick the New York Giants to be able to win this game. It just doesn't seem feasible for any number of reasons. But I'm going to take the New York Football Giants getting the 6.5. I didn't say they win the game, but I will take the 6.5 points. I think that the Cleveland Browns are figuring some things out offensively. I think DeShaun Watson will play better against a suspect secondary, but I also think that Shane Bowen is figuring some things out as well. More reps for Drew Phillips. We've seen Tyler Newman be out there on the field. You had Micah McFadden back this past week. I like that the defense is probably going to be a unit that gets a little bit better week over week. Cleveland might get better offensively week over week, just not yet. So I'm taking the Giants and the points. I think that they'll cover from that regard. Are you taking the Giants to win this game outright? Because I still need another 30 seconds to decide if I'm picking Big Blue to actually win.
Wow, Adam, look at you. You are talking about being
I'm a hero. I'm a hero to the people. Yeah.
Have a little conviction, Adam. Say it with your chest.
In 30 seconds, I'm going to have some conviction.
Yeah. Okay. So I will give you my little soliloquy so that you have enough time to decide what it is that you think you're going to give the listeners here.
I think, yeah.
So the key to the game to me is both offensive tackles for the Cleveland Browns are questionable and they both have injuries. They're getting limited participation in practice. The left tackle is Jedrick Wills. The right tackle is Jack Conklin. It seems like Jack Conklin feels like he's a little bit more ready to go. Jedrick Wills seems like, he was talking whether it's this week or next week. We don't want to rush anything. Maybe I'll be back out there. He sounds a little bit more questionable. That presents an opportunity for. You mentioned Brian Burns.
High level. We talked about Keyvon Thibodeaux and Brian Burns, but this is actually the reason why. 2 guys off of injury, only one of them back, and now you're putting in guys and swapping positions. Like there could be some opportunity here for confusion across their front.
Oh, completely. And so what I think is going to happen, we talked about the rushing attack. If I'm Cleveland and you're nursing both of your tackles back in, you're saying, I'm going to run the ball. I'm going to run the ball until the Giants can stop me. They didn't stop anyone last week. So obviously, I think Jerome Ford, anytime touchdown at plus 130 is a good one. Feels like he's going to get a ton of carries. I look at DeShaun Watson's under passing yards of like 194.5. I just think if your offensive tackles are hurt, why would you have him drop back considerably against the pass rush? If they can run the ball, they'll run the ball effectively. So for me, I look at it, time of possession for Cleveland, run the ball, try to keep the Giants offense off the field, limit the mistakes that DeShaun Watson can make. I agree with Las Vegas in this one in terms of the under, and
Yeah.
the Cleveland Browns. I do have it close. I do think the Giants are going to keep it relatively competitive. As I mentioned, Daniel Jones using his legs, I think will keep the Giants in the game.
Mhm.
I've got the Cleveland Browns covering, and I have the Cleveland Browns winning 17-10, Adam. That is my prediction. It just feels like both offenses still aren't there yet. And
Yeah.
so, of the two, give me the team with the elite defense rather than the one that's still trying to figure it out.
Let's have some fun for all the reasons you described. This offensive line's a mess. We think that Banks can handle Jeudy or at least mitigate him a little bit from his week 2 performance. Give me the Giants. Let's get sexy about it. I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring affair. I would definitely take the under on the 38 that they have set there in Vegas. Let's talk about, dude, why not? Why can't it be a 17-14 New York Football Giants victory? I can't go too bullish offensively for the Giants, but can they be down at the first half, only putting up a field goal, but then get the over on the 7.5 in the second half to hit that big parlay with a touchdown to Theo Johnson? Of course they can. 17-14. It's not about must win, but the Giants season is what it is. But who's Cleveland? Who's Cleveland really? They're nobody to, nobody's scared about. I walk into Cleveland, I walk into the dog pound, and I say, put those puppies on a leash. New York Football Giants get their first win of the season on the road.
Wow, unbelievable. So I
Hey,
think
by the way, just real quick here, I don't want to derail the show. I feel like I already had several times. Does anyone notice that in my rundown, I put keys to the win and also keys to victory? Because that's how important I thought it was that we talk about not only the keys to winning, but also the keys to getting a victory. And they're two different things. People might not think that, but they're two different things.
Well, at the end of the day, Adam, when you look at last week, the Giants scored 3 touchdowns. That was a key to the win. The key to the victory was not giving up a field goal on every single possession on defense. So, there's a little bit of win versus victory. So I completely can appreciate where you're at. But I think you and me are in the same mindset here. I think it's going to be low scoring. It feels like which team is going to manage the time of possession better and which offense is going to be able to move the ball and which offensive line is going to look better. To me, right now, I give Cleveland the slight edge. I need to see something from the Giants before I can commit to them again in a game like this against a stout defensive opponent. So we're all in the same range, but I've got the Browns taking this one 17-10. I really, really hope you're right, though, Adam. I really do. Genuinely do.
Wouldn't it make it more fun to go into that week 4 matchup with a Cowboys team that just got absolutely torched by the Saints and Carr and just have that conversation? Let's have a little bit of a dance. If you want to know about those underdogs and favorites, I'm taking the Bills at home, laying 5.5 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars, a mess. How do I know? Trevor Lawrence is my quarterback in fantasy, and so is Evan Neal in my tight end position. It's a mess. Give me those fine fellows there. And how about this for an underdog special? That's right. They benched Bryce Young. That's right. It's the Red Rocket. Andy Dalton under center, taking on Vegas on the road, plus 5.5 for me to take those Panthers to grab a little bit of victory and try to reset their franchise outlook this season. Andy, who you got?
I got the Seattle Seahawks minus 4.5 at home. Miami starting Skylar Thompson, obviously, to face the
future
injury.
Hall of Famer.
Future Hall of Famer. I love it.
Skylar Thompson.
Skylar Thompson to me doesn't feel like a guy that I have all the confidence in the world that can move the ball effectively. Geno Smith still looks good. He's definitely a top half quarterback in the league.
Right.
I think that they're going to be able to cover the 4.5 pretty convincingly at home. And so for me, that's one of the big plays. The underdog that I have this week, you got to give me the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, after they shellacked the Giants, they then are at home and they go up against the San Francisco 49ers. They win that game. Kevin O'Connell is cooking. So Houston, young quarterback on the road, going to Minnesota. I'll take the plus 2 points and a potential outright victory for Minnesota. Those are my picks. Adam, we got to turn it around because it was a tire fire for us. And I think the betting public at large last week.
I think a lot of people struggled. We struggled as well, but we'll get it back on track here. You heard it here first. Andrew Makowitz believes that Sam Darnold is a better quarterback than C.J. Stroud. Giants will be playing 1 o'clock on Sunday. Everybody enjoy yourselves. We'll be back in on Monday with our reactions. We're picking Monday Night Football. And listen, hopefully it's just one opportunity here early in the season. Giants, give the fan base a little hope. Come back home after a win on the road like that. We're during the week before Dallas. We get to herald you and talk about how successful that was and have some optimism. Otherwise, it's going to be dark days. We're already on the precipice, folks. Get us over on YouTube. Get us on onegiantpodcast.com where you got write-ups from Andy each and every week. We've also got us on your podcast feeds where we get those needs fulfilled as well. But until next time, hey, until the best times. As Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and name, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.